Yes, Mike. You did it. I have two objectives in my speech here tonight. Number one is to hopefully give you an idea and some appreciation for the moral case for separating state and the economy. As you will find out, we'll go a little bit deeper here than just politics. And hopefully you'll be able to take some ideas away from here tonight that you can use in your own activism. And I know a lot of you are involved in local politics and activism of different kinds. But the second part I want to do is that I have assumed that this is probably a fairly friendly group. I definitely know that it's an educated group. So I'm trying some new material on you here today. And I'm hoping that you'll give me some good feedback in the question and answer period or after the question and answer period. And, pepper me with questions. And that will help me make my message better as well. So hopefully it'll go two ways here and we'll all get something out of this. So let's get going. Most Americans understand on some level, explicitly or implicitly, why we have separation of state and church. We agree that faith is a personal matter, that choosing a faith or no faith is part of our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We acknowledge that accepting a faith must be a voluntary decision, and that faith that is forcefully imposed on us by the government, that is wrong, that is immoral. Now, in the United States, we almost have what we could say is a full, unregulated, laissez-faire market for religious ideas. Different denominations and congregations, faith sellers, if you like, they sell their products. They compete with their products for us, the buyers. Now, if a potential buyer of religious ideas find a certain faith product interesting, well, then a voluntary trade may take place. I may invest some time and some monetary contribution in exchange for getting a set of ideas, learning to know people that share my same beliefs, and getting some direction in life. So that is the marketplace for religious ideas. And we consider this the most natural state of affairs, really. We wouldn't want it any other way. We may dislike some of the faith sellers out there. The Catholics, or the Presbyterians, or the Mormons, or whatever. And we think that they probably offer some false advertising. Their product is not really something we agree with. Yes, we may think that some of the buyers out there are really gullible. How on earth can you subscribe to what this guy over here is saying? We may even try to persuade them to say that, you should really change your way here. Your product is not really good, or you should change your consumer habits when it comes to your faith. But in the end, we accept these market imperfections because we know that the alternative, some form of government force violating our rights, is a violation of the separation of state, a separation of state and church. And that we all, to a man, agree is something fundamental, and violating that is wrong, that is immoral. Now, making the case, the moral case for separating state and the economy, applies the same reasoning that I just shared with you to the marketplace of religious ideas. It applies the same ideas to the marketplace of products and services. What you and I produce is a personal matter. Our right to choose a product or service, or no product or service, is part of our inalienable individual rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And deciding to buy a product or a service must be a voluntary decision. That's what separation of state and the economy is telling you. And anything that is imposed by and regulated by the government when it comes to our product and services is wrong and immoral. Now, the only system that preserves that right to voluntarily trade products and services is a full, pure, uncontrolled, unregulated, laissez-faire free market. And in practice, this means separation of state and the economy. So the government has no more right to regulate our production and consumption of products and services than it has regulating our choice of faith. The only time we ask the government to step in is if someone violates our rights. For instance, a breach of contract, fraudulent activity. Now, on the separation of state and church side, we may ask the government come in those situations too. If someone is vandalizing our property, our church, if someone is fraudulent with our monetary contributions. But that is really it. When someone is there to violate our rights, that's when the government comes in, but otherwise it's hands off, both in the marketplace for religious ideas and in the marketplace for products and services. Now, before we move on here, let me give you an example of separating state and the economy. On the website, I have a separate what section. You can click on that and you'll see an entry by industry pretty much. Separate state and healthcare, separate state and retirement, state and food and agriculture. And you'll see more concretized what it would mean to get to a state of this separation. But let's take one example. Let's take healthcare. So what would it mean to separate state and healthcare? Well, we would basically abolish all federal, all state, all local laws, taxes, and regulations in favor of a private voluntary trade between individuals. There wouldn't be any forced participation in mandatory healthcare schemes, Obamacare, Medicare, and you wouldn't be forced to pay for that either. We would all, in the marketplace, find what we need, buyers and sellers. And of course, all the regulations that we have today, whether it's health insurance, whether it's drugs, or anything else related to healthcare, that would also be abolished. So what does this mean in practice? Well, we would remove the restrictions on health insurance providers' policy offerings. Today we have all these conditions, pre-existing conditions, for instance. That is something that would be worked out in the marketplace. We would not prevent people from buying health insurance and offer health insurance across state lines. Today we're basically having 50 countries providing health insurance because there is very little interaction allowed across state lines. Now, another part that would have to happen is reforming medical liability. Doctors, we know, a significant part of their cost is medical liability. And then we would eliminate the agencies that the government uses to impose all these rights violations, the FDA, Medicare, Medicaid, Health and Human Services, and so on. So that would be the end state. Now, obviously, getting there can be a process that takes a long, long time. If we take Medicare as an example, you wouldn't just pull the rug out from everybody who depends on that as their only option because they really don't have any alternatives today. So there would be groups of older people who would maintain probably their current system. But then as we get down in ages, people will have more time to plan. So you can gradually reduce that. And over a number of years, you would phase out the system. So we're not talking about an overnight cutoff of all benefits and things like that. Now, back to the comparison of the marketplace of religious ideas and that of products and services. So I said that as Americans, we pretty much all agree that in the marketplace for religious ideas, we need separation of state and church. Now, what does it look like in the marketplace for product and services, where I'm saying that total separation would mean that there would hardly be any government involvement at all? Well, given how committed we Americans are to those free markets in religious ideas, you'd think that we'd be as committed to the same system when it comes to our product and services, when it comes to the economy. You'd think people would welcome it with open arms. That they would consider laissez-faire for the economy a most natural state of affairs, just like when it comes to their religious ideas, to the separation of state and church. Yet, when it comes to the marketplace for product and services, most of us don't consider this full, pure, unregulated system the ideal state. If you pick any area of the economy, and we know how much government intrusion there is into our daily lives. For example, whether we dislike a seller or not, when we dislike a seller and we think he's engaging in some improper activities that are not necessarily fraudulent, we go to the government and say, hey, look at this guy over here. You need to do something about it. The same applies when we think a buyer has been cheated. All the consumer protection laws, etc., that is out there. All of that, well, maybe it protects a buyer, but what does it do to the seller? Think laws that regulates the consumption of alcohol, of food, of toys, and so on and so forth. No, we don't accept those market imperfections when it comes to products and services, although we accept them when it comes to religious ideas, to the separation of state and church. So consequently, we have asked our politicians to meddle in every aspect of our economic lives in a way that we would find wrong and immoral if it applied to our faith. We have permitted them to tax, to regulate, to fine, coerce, and threaten us to such an extent that had it happened in the marketplace for religious ideas, it would have been considered fundamentalism of the kind that is only practiced in Islamic countries today. Think about that. Now, what explains this contradiction between how we view the marketplace for religious ideas and that for product and services? Why do we consider it immoral for the government to meddle in issues related to our faith, but moral when it comes to the economy? And paradoxically, the answer is faith. Almost without exception, Americans of faith exercise their selfishly guarded religious freedom to practice a faith that teaches sacrifice and selflessness as the moral ideal. For example, and just take the most common one, Christianity. Jesus Christ sacrificing his life so that our sins may be forgiven. That is a moral ideal. That is what Christians of all denominations look up to. And most other major faiths have some form of selflessness or sacrifice as a moral ideal. Now, before I explore that deeper, let's take a step back and look at morality as such. Because it's important to understand morality's role here in discussing the separation of state and the economy. What kind of role does morality play in our lives? It has great power over us, and for good reasons. It's necessary for us to flourish. And why is that? Well, we have free will. At least most people think we do. So we have a capacity to act rightly or wrongly. And so we need some guidelines to know what is right and what is wrong. And that is what morality provides us. Furthermore, most of us have a desire to be good by some moral standard. We go through life with a certain moral ambition, if you like. And we look for moral principles to live by, and we try to act according to those principles. when life draws to a close, we would like to be able to take stock, look back and say, hey, I lived a pretty good life. And for most of us, that means that we lived what we think is a moral life too. So here's the crux. If the faith that we subscribe to teaches us that selflessness and sacrifice are moral ideals, then that's what we will try to practice. The problem is that practicing a morality of selflessness and sacrifice disarms us against those who say and who want to use government to force and institutionalize such practices throughout society. After all, they say, if we subscribe to a morality of selflessness, what better way is there than for the government to help us fulfill that moral ideal? So a vote for universal health care, for food stamps, social security, government education is a vote to help us live up to our moral ideal. A tax here, regulation there, in the name of helping the needy, the less fortunate, the elderly, the children. It's all there. The government is there to help us. Why shouldn't we be willing to sacrifice a little bit of our individual rights? It may hurt our pocketbook. It may prevent us from fulfilling our own selfish ambitions. We may experience a moment of reluctance. But who can object if selflessness and sacrifice is the moral ideal? Now, anybody concerned with the size and growth of government should consider this a sad state of affairs. And obviously, a lot of us in this room share that sentiment. And this is where separate comes in. Championing the moral case for separating state and the economy requires a different code of morality. It requires a morality of rational self-interest, not selflessness, of rational selfishness, not self-sacrifice. And rational in this context, and this is important, it means putting your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness first while respecting that other people have those same rights. So rational self-interest rejects the traditional views of selfishness. You probably heard about short-term hedonistic pursuits, someone going off doing whatever they like to do. And it rejects selfish actions violating the individual rights of others. So it teaches that you are right to selfishly guard your economic freedom, as selfishly right to guard that as you are to guard your religious freedom. And only when you're able to proclaim with moral certainty that the fruits of your labors are yours to keep and dispose of, only then are you able to defend individual rights as it pertains to the economy. And only when you become as rightfully self-interested in championing your economic freedom as you are in championing your religious freedom, your choice of faith, will you be able to effectively oppose the immoral intrusion of government into your economic life. Only when you experience the same moral outrage at the government taxing and regulating your economic life as you experience when they try to meddle with your religious life, only then will we start to see progress towards less government, towards separation of state and the economy. Now, mission impossible? On the contrary, I'm actually convinced, I'm pretty optimistic after all of this, that we're closer than we think. But it will require some serious rethinking of some deeply held moral beliefs. Now, so how do we get to a point where a morality of rational self-interest becomes more widely accepted? We're not talking about a majority here. We're talking about changing ideas that will kind of have a ripple effect out there, and eventually people will start voting the right way. How do we get to a place where championing the moral case for separating state and the economy becomes more accepted? Now, I don't have any silver bullets. I don't think there are any magic wands. There are no real shortcuts. This is a lot of, not blood, hopefully, but a lot of sweat and a whole deal of tears. But the answer is one individual at a time. And it starts with you, and you, and you, with everybody, one individual at a time. Let's say that on some level you identify yourself with what I've outlined. You think that there is something to what I'm saying. And you're a person of faith, subscribing to a moral ideal of selflessness. I mean, after all, you've been taught this since you were this old, in the sandbox, the first time you were asked to share a toy with someone. Didn't feel right then, doesn't feel right now, because it's wrong. Okay? And you're concerned with the intrusion of government into your life. So, when it's time to go to the voting booth, you experience a conflict. On the one hand, you want to vote no because, let's say, a ballot initiative. Someone is asking for a tiny sales tax increase because we have this worthy educational initiative over here. And you're thinking, well, it's a tiny sales tax increase, but hey, that is just one step further towards more government. But then the other side of you that has been taught the morality of selflessness says that, you know, I should probably sacrifice a little bit here. It's just a tiny increase in the sales tax. And it is for this worthy educational pursuit over here. So you're conflicted. You experience a contradiction between the part of you that selfishly guards your economic freedom and the part that tells you to selflessly give it up. So let me suggest a way to resolve that contradiction. And forgive me for this, but it'll be a little bit of life coaching. I'm asking you to be as rationally self-interested, as rationally selfish, when guarding your economic freedom as guarding your religious freedom. So take a cue from your views of the separation of state and church and adopt them in the area of separation of state and the economy. Because your views on religious freedom and the separation of state and church are right. You're right to be selfish about that. And in that area, you're practicing it. And I'm the first to admit that this is easier said than done. So there is no standard map for this journey that you're embarking on. And adjusting moral convictions is a challenging process that takes independence and courage. And face it, quite frankly, most people are probably not up to the task. For some of you, this may be the first time you ever hear about the morality of rational self-interest. Maybe you've never heard the term separating state and the economy. Obviously, you will need more time to think about this. Someone else in here may have heard this a few times, and maybe this is the tipping point. No? I hope so. This is the tipping point. More power to you. Go forth. But wherever you are, consider these ideas. And finally, just one suggestion. Because I see this all the time. Whatever you do, don't evade the issue. If you've ever experienced the feeling, I don't want to go there, because here is this idea coming, and you're thinking, uh-oh, this is very uncomfortable. You kind of shut it out, and you try to put it over here and leave it there. But unresolved conflicts and contradictions, they tend to fester. They act like prolonged procrastinations. We've all procrastinated, right? Oh, we have an exception. I'm glad to hear that. You could probably come up and teach us one thing or two. Yeah, exactly. There you go. So you walk around with this subconscious feeling or conscious feeling that something is wrong, right? You have a gut feeling here in your stomach. You feel uneasy of some kind. And then when you finally get around to dealing with it, it's almost exhilarating afterwards. This sense of relief that, yes, this dreaded thing, I finally dealt with it, it's past me, and I feel so much better. A weight was lifted from you. Now these contradictions that you carry around in your mind, they work the same way. They sit there and fester, and if you don't do anything about them, they will make you unhappy. Because once they're resolved, it kind of eases your conscience, gives you a sense of calm. So unresolved contradiction undercut that capacity for living happily. And in the end, isn't that all what this is about? Living happily. It's about your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of your happiness. It's a rationally selfish pursuit while respecting your fellow man's right to do the same. So I hope that you seriously consider joining me and a growing number of people in championing the moral case for separating state and the economy. It's obviously a fight against government intrusion in our life. It's obviously a fight to protect our rights. But most fundamentally, it's a fight to change the dominant moral idea of selflessness, of sacrifice, in favor of rational self-interest. That is the moral case for separating state and the economy. Thank you. All right, I see a bunch of hands here.